Hello, you are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is the daily summary of combat operations on the Ukrainian front. Trump spoke yesterday and said that Indian Prime Minister Modi promised him today that India will no longer buy Russian oil. He also said that Zelensky wants to go on the offensive, and now Trump is thinking about what weapons to give to Ukraine for an offensive. Well, as they say, the flag is in their hands. If they are retreating while sitting on defense at 600 square kilometers per month, then how badly will their front collapse when they concentrate forces for some kind of offensive? We will see. Fighting on the front continues, and we keep studying the situation. So friends, today's episode will be about both good and not so good news. We will talk about successes in Dnipropetrovsk region, successes around Pokrovsk, and we will also analyze what that assault near Shakhove was, how many losses there actually were, whether the assault can be considered successful, and whether something could have been done differently to minimize losses. Well, let's start with that attack. I purposely waited a bit so emotions would subside and to ask the guys on the ground what exactly happened there, and then, with a more or less clear head, proceed to analyze what took place. So what happened? For those who are not aware, there are footage of a Russian attack on Shakhove in this sector. The attack employed a large amount of armored vehicles. 17 units were involved. The footage is heavy because losses of both vehicles and Russian soldiers are visible. Now let's break it down. First of all, the Ukrainian claim that they burned all 17 armored vehicles does not correspond to reality. In fact, 11 vehicles were knocked out, of which irretrievably burned were 8, 3 were evacuated, and 6 armored vehicles returned to their positions intact. As for personnel losses, I will not name figures here, but I will say this. They exist and they are not small. And of course the question arises, was it worth it for some village? Was it necessary to use that amount of armor when there are so many drones in the air now? The answer is the following. Shakhove is a very, very fortified settlement. Because it is not just a village, it is strategically important, at least for resolving the issue with the Dobropilya salient, to secure it completely so that the offensive can be developed further. Around Shakhove, a ring of defensive lines has been built in the form of trenches, minefields and dragon's teeth, and these dragon's teeth are arranged in several rows. Tactics of seeping through with small groups do not work here because it is not possible to get those groups in. I only yesterday evening spoke with a drone operator who works in this sector, Shakhove Vladimirovka, and he says, quote, "It is impossible to pass or drive through. We are controlling the sectors that they, the Ukrainian forces, control." End quote. That is the situation, and the only way to break the defense and advance is exactly such a massive attack using a large amount of armor. Yes, part of it burned, but that was inevitable. Nevertheless, it was possible to advance, break the defensive line and reach Shakhove from the east. So in summary, the assigned task was accomplished, at least partially if not fully. The question is only the cost, but that is not for me to judge. I do not have all the data that the commanders on the ground who decide the method of attack have. We can only draw conclusions. There was an advance, and the price was high. We have more or less sorted out Shakhove. I will add only that, although a heavy price had to be paid for the breakthrough, the situation for the UAF garrison in Shakhove has now deteriorated significantly. They have a single road out of the village, and that road is completely controlled by Russian drone operators. In other words, they cannot leave Shakhove, because if they try to leave, they will all be hit, and the Russians also control the sky above them. It is a difficult situation overall, both for the Russian army and for the UAF, but harder for the UAF because they find themselves in an operational encirclement in Shakhove. Moving on to other Russian advances, on the Pokrovsk sector, Russian fighters managed to finish off Novopavlivka. Not the large Novopavlivka in Dnipropetrovsk region, but this Novopavlivka on the southern approaches to Pokrovsk. The day before yesterday, Russian fighters broke into the western part of the village under the cover of fog and took it under control. And now they have completely cleared the entire village. In addition to taking Novopavlivka, they also cleared all territory north of Chunishino along the railway tracks. Behind that strip of railway, there are several UAF strongpoints where they hold out, but their exit choke point is only 1 kilometer, so they are effectively blocked. There may be around a dozen UAF fighters there, But in any case, they did not have time to withdraw, and they will not be able to hold back the Russian army given the current front configuration. Therefore, in the near future, this area of 3.5 square kilometers will be recolored red, which will signify the capture of all territory south of Pokrovsk. But in fact, taking Novopavlivka is important not so much for itself as for the further prospects. What are the prospects? Look where movement from Novopavlivka will go. Of course, toward the railway and the railway station at 394 kilometers, plus the advance and capture of two suburban villages, Hanatovka and Ro. This, in turn, will allow blocking Pokrovsk from the east and partially separating Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad. Ideally, one might hope for something like a complete blockade of Mirnohrad, but that is probably unrealistic now, so we will not consider that scenario. However, reaching the railway station at 394 kilometers is a realistic prospect, possibly achievable even by the end of the month. And in general, regarding Pokrovsk itself, yesterday a Ukrainian serviceman with the call sign Muchnoy wrote on his Telegram channel that all approaches to Pokrovsk are already under Russian fire control and Pokrovsk itself is in a firebag. What can I say? That is true, all these roads from the west are under fire, and from the north they also cannot approach. Therefore, the prospects for taking Pokrovsk itself have risen sharply in the past couple of weeks. I think there is a chance to handle it by the end of the year. The key factor, as I have said more than once, will be the battle for Rodinske and the advance toward Hryshyn. Progress is being observed in both places now. Moving on to the fighters of the Vostok grouping. We have good progress in Dnipropetrovsk region. The fighters managed to press Alexeyevka, and what is marked here is not a UAF advance, it was just cartographers who earlier colored control incorrectly. Now the fighters of the Vostok grouping clarified where the line of contact runs, and they recolored it back. So the advance, Alexeyevka was pressed, and they advanced along a 6-kilometer wide sector to the east. The advance amounted to 1.5 kilometers in depth toward Aristopol. From the current positions, it is 2.5 kilometers to the village, not much. From the Alexeyevka side movement will go toward Volchye. The distance there is less than 2 kilometers. Although, as Ukrainian military experts say, we can also push toward Novolexandrivka. It is about 4 kilometers to it. We can go both ways, to Volky and to Novolexandrivka. So prospects vary. The UAF command urgently needs reserves here, and they do not have them. Moreover, with the capture of Alexeyevka, the number of settlements under Russian control in Dnipropetrovsk region is already 17. And by the end of September, that number will certainly increase, at least by 2 more settlements, perhaps by 3. On the Zaporizhzhia sector, which is also in the area of responsibility of the Vostok grouping, namely the Uspenovka agglomeration, there have been no specific updates yet, but I know from the guys that Okhotnaichi will soon be declared under Russian control because final clearing operations are underway. Also, we are trying to force a crossing at Yanchur, but that is proving difficult. At the same time, Russian aviation is working very, very densely with FAB aerial bombs over Uspenovka itself, destroying UAF strongpoints and fortifications. We are trying to wipe them out, so the Russian infantry will have an easier time working. That's the situation. We are waiting for new footage and updates from the guys. We are waiting to see what Trump will say and what kind of offensive the UAF will launch. After Russian attacks, emergency power outages are now in effect across 9 regions, according to Ukrenergo. The company explained this decision as a response to a difficult situation in the energy system, caused by the consequences of Russian strikes. Emergency outages were introduced in the Sumy, Kharkiv, Poltava, Dnipropetrovsk, and partially in the Kirovohrad, Kyiv, and Cherkasy regions. In the Zaporizhzhia region, only industrial consumers are being cut off. In the Chernihiv region, 3 rounds of outages are currently being applied. In the Kyiv metro, there is a collapse. Part of the underground network has lost power. Local sources report that the Kyiv subway is partially without electricity. Our source says that the Russian armed forces are methodically destroying what remains of left bank Ukraine's energy sector, gas extraction, fuel storage facilities, railway infrastructure and rolling stock. This night was no exception, according to the Telegram channel Legitimny. The source claims that next year, almost all energy and gas production facilities on the left bank of Ukraine will be destroyed, while half of the railway infrastructure will be wiped out. Rolling stock losses are expected to reach 50 to 65%, which would effectively halt passenger rail transport due to a shortage of locomotives. It should be understood that every day of such strikes increases the scale of devastation in Ukraine, damage that cannot realistically be repaired even in the next 20 years. Now let's briefly move on to political news. NATO is discussing new rules that would simplify the task of shooting down Russian fighter jets carrying missiles, The Telegraph reports. According to the newspaper's sources, the decisive factors will be the aircraft's weapon load and flight trajectory. The Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Alexis Grinovich, called for the creation of a unified air and missile defense system. Sources explain that such a system would help eliminate so-called national reservations that could prevent a collective response. Meanwhile, Trump once again repeated his familiar refrain, that he is very disappointed with the pace of the Ukrainian settlement, despite having good relations with Putin. The American president also said that Zelensky will ask him this Friday for deliveries of Tomahawk missiles. I know what he wants to ask for. He needs weapons. He wants Tomahawks. We have plenty of Tomahawks, said the US president. According to Trump, Russia does not want to end the war, and therefore he will meet with Zelensky to transfer new weapons to Ukraine. In recent months, China has significantly increased exports to Russia of components used to manufacture fiber optic drones, technology that has allowed Moscow to crush Ukrainian defenses along the front line. The Washington Post reports grimly. According to Chinese customs data, shipments of fiber optic cable to Russia grew nearly tenfold over the summer, reaching 328,000 miles in August. For comparison, only 79 miles were sold to Ukraine that same month. Exports of lithium-ion batteries also rose sharply, hitting a record $54 million in June. For Ukraine, the figure was around $11 to $12 million. The publication writes that this has given Russia a decisive advantage in the conflict. Beijing claims to maintain a neutral position, and its manufacturers have reduced direct exports of ready-made drones to Russia. However, official data show that China has sharply increased shipments of components. Earlier, media reported that Chinese experts regularly visit Russia for joint military drone development, including at companies under sanctions. U.S. presidential envoy Steve Witkoff plans to leave the Trump administration to focus on his business, according to a Western outlet citing anonymous sources, as relayed by Oleg Tsaryov. Witkoff is expected to step down by the end of the year, though the timeline may depend on progress in Gaza. Speaking in the Knesset, Trump said that after resolving the Middle East issue, Witkoff could take on the Ukraine file. According to the outlet, within the administration, Witkoff is known for his independence and the fact that he did not receive a salary. He has said that after losing his son, he helped others purely out of compassion. Tsaryov adds that it would be unfortunate if this rumor proves true, as Witkoff had established good contacts with Russia. The U.S. military believes that transferring Tomahawks to Ukraine would bring the United States closer to direct confrontation with Russia, the New York Times writes. The Pentagon has already developed plans to sell or transfer these long-range missiles if Trump gives the order. Trump also declared that several countries have allegedly decided to withdraw from BRICS because of the threat of U.S. tariffs. The American president insisted that the economic political bloc fell apart out of fear of a tariff war with Washington. He said that countries began to leave BRICS. Quote, "And I told everyone who wants to be in BRICS that it's fine, but we're going to impose tariffs against you. Everyone refused. They all decided to leave BRICS," he said during a meeting with Argentine President Javier Milei. However, Trump did not specify which countries he was referring to. To date, not a single member has left the alliance since its creation. Earlier, the US president called BRICS an attack on the dollar and threatened trade measures against those planning to join it. Yet reality does not seem to support these American threats. India continues to buy Russian oil, ignoring Washington's statements. China has outright promised to fight to the end in the trade war if the US decides to go all in. It seems BRICS is not in a hurry to collapse just because of Trump's stern look. The trade war between China and the United States is not merely a dispute over tariffs and trade balance. It is a struggle over the form in which technological singularity will arrive, the moment when technological development becomes irreversible and large language models surpass human intelligence. Whoever first creates a general artificial superintelligence and achieves mass robotization will set the rules of the future. In this race, money and political blocks no longer matter. The only goal is technological production. Once it is achieved, all other nations will have to line up behind the winner. Existing financial systems, economic scales, and traditional industries will quickly lose relevance. America today is betting everything on large language models. The market is being flooded with investment. The sector related to artificial intelligence research and deployment already accounts for about 70% of US stock market capitalization. The country has effectively turned into one giant AI startup, where technological optimism fuels a leap towards singularity. China, although still lagging in developing its own semiconductors and large language models, is responding with industrial automation, mass implementation of robotics, and AI algorithms. According to the International Federation of Robotics, more than 290,000 industrial robots are already installed in China, compared to about 34,000 in the United States and only 2,500 in the United Kingdom. In the port of Shanghai, unmanned container ships controlled by algorithms are already operating. According to The Telegraph, executives of Western tech corporations openly admit after visiting China that the efficiency gap between East and West is widening. The CEO of Ford bluntly said the company has no future if it loses this competition. Chinese cars already surpass Western ones in quality, technology, and production cost. Senior managers of Western energy companies have also spoken of fully automated factories, the so-called dark factories. These are completely automated facilities where humans are not present, so lighting is unnecessary, hence the name. Every process, from assembly to packaging, is performed by robots and autonomous systems. Production runs 24 hours a day without shifts, breaks, or weekends. Product costs are minimal, efficiency is maximal. This level of automation is already implemented at a number of Chinese enterprises, and it deeply worries the West, as it allows China to increase production volume and reduce costs, outpacing competitors in both speed and price. In addition, China controls the extraction and processing of critical rare earth metals, the backbone of the semiconductor industry. All these efforts are not driven by profit or political alliances, but by a push toward a new technological world order. This confrontation is more important and sharper than even the nuclear race of the 20th century. What is at stake is control over the future of civilization itself.